You're listening to episode 126, Using Your Past Experiences to Become Resilient Today with Mary Lovely. Welcome to the Grass Gets Greener podcast, the show for survivors by survivors. I'm your host, Melissa Wilson, a bullying survivor and anti-bullying advocate. And each week you'll hear from a survivor who has overcome a traumatic experience to go on to not only survive, but thrive, so that you can too, starting now. Hey there, welcome, and thank you for tuning into this episode. So last time we were joined by Laura Parrott-Perry, co-founder of Say It Survivor, and today we're going to be joined by her cousin and fellow co-founder of Say It Survivor, Mary Lovely. We're going to hear about Mary's experience of having been sexually abused by her and Laura's grandfather, as well as her experience with childhood bullying and how it all affected her. But first, I do just want to mention that this episode is sponsored by Navni. Navni is the top-ranked anonymous writing website in the world. Navni provides free wellness resources and low-cost online therapy services to help people cope with various levels of emotional distress. Write anonymously, feel better at novni.com. So I'm really excited to be able to bring you Mary's episode right after Laura's, and if you haven't had a chance to listen to Laura's yet, I would encourage you to check that one out as well, as Laura and Mary's stories go together. And if you have had a chance to check it out already, great. Let me tell you a little more about what you'll hear in this episode. Mary's going to share with us about the self-doubt that she had about the abuse having actually happened, and how reconnecting with Laura made her feel validated. She's also going to talk about the bullying that she experienced as well, and how allowing people to treat her poorly became the norm for her, and how she thought she was destined for unhappiness. She's also going to share about how her experiences made her resilient, and what reconnecting with Laura has meant to her. So whether you've been sexually abused or bullied in your past or both, Mary wants to share with you today the message that things can get better even if it doesn't feel that way, and she's going to share how that has happened for her. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get into this one, and I'm going to go bring Mary on. Mary, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for joining me here today to share your story with us.
Well, I'm very happy to be here, Melissa. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad to have you on here today and that it worked out such that your episode is going live after Laura's. And so in a way, I guess this is sort of a continuation of the last episode. And of course, it can stand alone as well for anyone who hasn't listened to that episode. However, I do encourage those listening to check that one out if they haven't yet, because in that one, we heard about Laura's experience growing up after she was sexually abused by your and Laura's grandfather. And now, Mary, we'll hear about your experience being sexually abused as well, along with your experience being bullied growing up too. And I know that, you're out there sharing your story because you want to help others. So I'm just glad to have you here today to continue a conversation that was started last time and to hear about the things that have helped you in your healing journey. So what I like to do is, have you start with your story of what you experienced, and then we'll go from there. Does that sound okay to you?
That sounds great, and thank you. I'm grateful for the opportunity, and I do hope that what we talk about today can be helpful to your listeners.
Yeah.
Because in situations where people are bullied, it is, you can really feel really hopeless and that you can't get out of it. So hopefully we can address that and give some positive advice.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I'll tell you a little bit about. I will tell you my, and for those of you who did listen before, it's quite similar to Laura's, but my version is that I was sexually molested and abused by my maternal grandfather, probably starting around age 7, and my abuse actually continued until right about after I had finished puberty. I did tell my parents and Laura's dad, my uncle, and it fell on deaf ears. And it was sort of, I told them in the kitchen one night after dinner, after I learned that Laura had revealed that she had been abused, and it was sort of like, oh, well, pass the potatoes. So I went on to continue to have to see my grandfather for many, many years and to figure out ways to avoid him and to figure out how to, escape. So it was a very challenging, difficult, sad, and horrific time. I don't remember. Um, I don't remember a lot of specifics, but I do remember the long-lasting trauma. So
And
that's
now, did you and Laura have contact with each other at this time?
no. We actually, Laura and I. Well, that's a good question. Laura and I were very close as children. I'm 4 years older than Laura is, and Laura has two sisters, and I was very close to my cousins, especially to her. And Laura told her mother that she had been abused by our grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
And the result of that was that she never had to see him again. And at the time, her parents were going through a divorce. And it was an ugly divorce.
Mm-hmm.
And Laura's father, my uncle, was living at my house at the time. So what happened was Laura told her mother, and then who then told her father, my uncle. And when I found out that she had told about her abuse, I chimed in and said, he did that to me. And it was just silence. And from that moment on, I didn't see her. I saw her one time. I saw her, I think it was probably 3 or 4 years later at our Nana's wake. And I didn't talk to her. I looked at her and she looked at me, but she was just kind of in the corner with her mom and her sisters. And I didn't see her again. But back in 2014, I think it was, yes, 2014, I was looking at Facebook one night, and it was the night before Thanksgiving, and I was feeling really nostalgic, missing my family and missing my cousins, and I wondered what they were up to. And I turned to Facebook and I plugged her name in, and I found her, and I friended her, and I sent her a friend request. And the next morning, on Thanksgiving morning, I woke up to an accepted friend request from her. And it has been an amazing journey since then, but we have reconnected. And our first phone call we scheduled was about 2 weeks after Thanksgiving. And we spoke to each other for 3 hours. And
I'm sure you had a lot to talk about.
We had a lot to talk about. And, we were catching up on, what have you been doing for the past 35 years? And then at one point, I said,
neither one of you knew of what the other had gone through at that point.
Well, that's the interesting part. Laura knew that I had been abused, but I did not know that she had been abused. And how that played out was that I said to her, why was it that we never saw each other again? And she said, well, I think there were lots of reasons. And as she says now, she said, it was going so well. And, oh no, we're going to have this conversation. So I said, well, let me tell you a story. And I told her the story of me telling my parents that day in the kitchen. And I said, it was a warm summer day and your dad came home where he was living at our house again. And he was furious at your mom. And he said that your mother had accused Grandpa of molesting you 3 girls. And my mom and dad and my Uncle Bill were furious at her and thought that she was making it up and were just all up in arms. And then I stepped forward in my tiny little voice and said, he did that to me. And that was at the point where they said, I wish you had told me. And I said, well, I'm telling you now. And that was the end of it. And so at that point in the conversation with Laura, she said, I knew you had been abused. And I said, how did you know that? And she said, I knew because you warned me. You warned us. So the weekend before Laura and her sisters were slated to go stay at Grandpa's house, they told me, and I warned her. I said, Grandpa's going to try to kiss you on the mouth, and he's going to try to touch you. And Laura, I don't remember this, but she remembers this. And Laura laughed because she was little. She was 7 years old, and she thought that was preposterous.
Mm-hmm.
Why would I want to do that? So she and I talked, probably for another hour and a half about that. And it was a moment for me of truth where, I had lived my life having to step up and continue and forge on and be, put my chin up and keep going and, try to be resilient and try to be clever about avoiding him and, and the whole time doubting, did I make it up? Did I make that up when I was little? Did that really happen to me? And so until I was, in my 40s, I'm living with this, potential self-doubt. Did I make it up? Did I dream it? And, in one phone call after a Facebook request, that one question that had just been nagging at me for my entire life had been clarified. And I knew that I didn't make it up. So it was a life-changing moment.
Yeah, I can imagine. You must have felt so validated at that point.
I felt so validated. I also felt furious at the adult who allowed it to continue, who didn't protect me. And so, living with that for all those years was life altering. And
yeah, of course. And
it's
interesting how, the two of you were on your own paths and had no idea, what was going on in each other's lives. And then you reconnected all these years later and were able to tie it all together and to connect on this level.
Yeah.
And of course, for you, Mary, I know that the abuse lasted longer than it did for Laura. And then you had other stuff happen as well. But whenever you want to get back into that.
Yes, well, I think it's a good time to talk about that. So, all of this had been happening, and I was grappling with, self-doubt and, all these different, the aftermath showing up in so many different ways. But if I back up and go, which is kind of what's really interesting part of this is that I suffered from bullying for 2 times in my life. And the first was when I was in middle school, and it was between the 6th grade and 7th grade. And it was so horrible that I missed so much school. And my parents ended up pulling me out of the school system and sending me away to a different school, to a private school.
That's such a tough age, too, to be bullied. That's when I was bullied as well. And it's just, kids can be so mean at that age.
Kids can be so mean. I have 3 boys right now, and 2 are 16 and 1 is 14. And one is in his last year of middle school. But the middle school is just a brutal, brutal time for kids in general. But especially, it's an age where you're trying to find out who you are. You're trying to prove yourself. You're trying to find out where your place in the world is. And I think that's probably, that's one of the reasons why it happens. And it's also one of the reasons why it's so destructive.
Yeah.
Because
you're trying to find out who you are, and the bullying is just pulling you away from that and making it more difficult for you to figure that out.
Well, it's also defining that for you. So you're not defining who you are. You're having other people assign that to you, and you're having other people other people have the power to dictate where you stand. Well, they try to anyway, and that's what it feels like.
Yeah.
And it's a time when you're not only trying to find your way socially, but also, you're taking on more responsibility, and also your body is changing. So it's a very awkward stage in so many different ways. But my bullying was by the hands of the popular girls, and I was one of the popular girls. And all of a sudden, they turned on me, and it came out of nowhere. And it started with a hate note in my locker. And they would tell me, we've decided that we're all going to be mad at you this week. And because you got the new Nike sneakers. I mean, ridiculous, crazy stuff. And that went on and on and on. And it got worse. It got to the point where it was almost as if I didn't exist, or I wasn't, I was the invisible girl. And they spread horrible rumors about me. And it was so painful that I would go home every single day and I would weep. And I remember, feeling like I had to be perfect. Like if I could be nice enough, they'll be nicer to me. If I could be pretty enough, they'll be nicer to me. If I wore the right clothes, and on and on and on.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to be perfect is impossible.
Yeah.
And
but yeah, you're thinking, what can you do to please them so that they won't bully you?
Right. And what can I do? And I remember so clearly that that I felt like I was walking on ice, thin ice, every day because, sorry about that, and because I never knew at what moment. I mean, one moment they could all be very lovely and pleasant, and we'll have fun and do what middle school girls do, and then the next minute it's like out of left field I get the little folded up hate note in my locker. So it was, and it really was only those girls, and I had other friends, but I can just remember the looks of the other kids who weren't in that circle with sympathy. They just looked at me sympathetically. But it was killing me inside, and the effects of that, coupled with my abuse, led to the aftermath. The laundry list is long, and if anyone, for your listeners who heard Laura's interview, it's pretty very, very similar. I mean, I had low self-worth, I had low self-esteem, I became anorexic, I then became bulimic as well, promiscuity, really, really, really hard on myself, scared, fearful, pleaser, and the worst was perfectionist. And I really see a correlation between trying to be perfect so everyone would like me and not be mad at me, to trying to be perfect, which is just not possible. It's imperfect. We're imperfect.
Mm-hmm.
So, I overcompensated, and it was hard and sad. And I went to a new school, and it was a wonderful school, and it was an all-girls school, and I was embraced and loved and had many friends and did well and thrived and participated in the plays and did all different sports. And wonderful experience, and I graduated with great memories and great friends, some of whom I have seen recently.
This was for high school?
That was for high school. It didn't make those feelings go away. I still was walking on eggshells because I was always, you never know where it's going to come from.
Yeah, I had a pretty good experience in high school after the bullying in middle school, but I was still just very guarded. I was like, okay, I'm sure this is not going to last. Someone's going to start bullying me at some point. It's just terrible to have that fear.
Yes, it is. And that fear actually became a reality for me when I went to college.
Mm.
So I went off to college and made a lot of friends. I have an outgoing personality. I made a lot of friends. I was elected to be the vice president of my class for 2 years in a row. But my first year, my freshman year started out great. And it was, that was in the 80s. And it was like, you see all those 80s movies like St. Elmo's Fire, and that's kind of how it felt. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, but it's like a
Yeah, I
clique of
have.
friends. Everybody's friendly and it's all fun. And about halfway through the year, my two roommates, who I thought were really close, was really close with them, they completely turned on me. And it never matters what it's about, but it came down to, I think it was, jealousy or whatever it was. But I didn't realize it was happening at first, but I found out later that, I would go home to my parents' house for the weekend, and they would come in with all their friends and steal all my clothes and wear all my clothes. And my mother's christening ring that I used to wear, first communion ring I used to wear, disappeared. So they took that, and I later found out. And they put a cockroach in my bed, and they spread horrible rumors about me to people. And it was defamation of character. And then it got really bad where people feared them. So we'd go to like the college bar, and I remember one girl saying to me, "I'm sorry, I really can't talk to you because I don't want them to not like me." And I remember leaving and having somebody follow me. And it was terrible. And it was so bad that I ended up leaving the college. I stayed my sophomore year. This happened freshman year. I stayed my sophomore year because I had been reelected to vice president of my class. And I decided that I was going to leave on my terms. And I ended up leaving, and I went to a different college, and I thrived and did great. But I felt robbed of my college experience. So it really came to a culmination one night when they came home after a night of drinking, and they attacked me. And one tried to cut my throat.
Wow,
with a
they
pen.
physically attacked you.
Yeah, yeah. So two incidents of bullying and, childhood sexual trauma, which has wreaked havoc in all the things that I had talked to you about. So, there's a lot to undo.
Yeah, and you were telling us, the ways in which you were affected. What impact was that having on your life at this time? How was it affecting, like, your relationships, your work, all of that stuff?
I was really depressed. I was really sad. And I wasn't working yet. I was in college, but I really recoiled I transferred colleges as a junior. And I decided to commute over an hour each way to school and live at my parents' house because I didn't want to go, run into that again. I was, for someone who was so gregarious, I really was just quiet and kept to myself and had few friends. And it really did, the experience really did a tattoo on me. I did end up, another part of that was that I think is really poignant is that I had a boyfriend, and he was horrible to me. He was abusive. He sexually abused me. And he treated me terribly. And, because I had been abused all throughout my childhood, you become to adopt that as your baseline. So here I am, trying to get out of this, and I'm still caught up with this guy who was just bad news. And that ended up continuing. I'm remarried, but my first marriage, I was married to an abusive alcoholic. And it took me who betrayed me and cheated on me. And it took me a long time to get over that. But, these are all these things like tolerating bad behavior from people that you care about, poor relationships, abusive men, whether it's verbally abusive, physically abusive, um, infidelity, um, and just allowing people to treat you poorly because that becomes the norm for you.
Right.
So that permeated my life for years. So I had all those bad feelings about myself, but I ended up being uber successful in my career because I'm a perfectionist and because I have something to prove. So I ended up building a business that my dad gave me $400 and I ended up over the course of 20 years building it into a very, very established, profitable, good sized company, which I've sold. But I think that it's important to be aware in all of this, especially for someone who's being bullied right now, or someone who's a kid, or at that place, or anyone who's enduring any sort of trauma or just coming out of any sort of trauma, that it doesn't have to stay that way. It gets better as much as you don't believe it at the time. But from where I was with my childhood abuse and to where I am as in my 50s, they're completely opposite ends of the spectrum. I have a beautiful marriage to an amazing man. I have two great stepsons, a great son. I have a career. I have a wonderful life. And I never would have thought that. I really thought that I was destined to just unhappiness for so many years, but it doesn't have to be that way. And how I got there is I did a lot of work.
Yeah, I think it's a great time to kind of get into that a little bit and talk about the things that have helped you to get to where you are today. And when did things start to shift for you?
So I think really not that long ago, things started to shift for me after my divorce, which was probably and right around when I met I have to say it was right around when I met my husband, which was 9 years ago. And I had done years and years of therapy. And I think it's just, keeping up with that. And I think it's experience. And I think it's, having hard things happen to you because, I had a lot of hard things happen to me throughout my life, even after that. And because I had these experiences, I developed thick skin and I became resilient. And so things started to change for me I would say about 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
and
sometimes it's amazing when we meet the right person, and have a healthy relationship with someone. It can
yeah,
build us up so much.
yeah. Well, what it was for me is, see, I had never had any relationship with any man that I felt as if I could trust him.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing is that I have amazing women in my life. My best friend has been my best friend since we were in high school. She has been like my everything. She's been my maid of honor twice. She's my son's godmother. She has been through my life with me every step of the way, no matter what. And she's, and I have other women friends that I've had. I still have friends I keep in touch with from elementary school, from middle school, from high school, college, all stages of my life. I have great women, but the men have not been. The men have been abusive.
Mm-hmm.
And, if I look back, it's interesting because, I was abused by girls. I was abused by women. But they were just the wrong women, and in terms of men, it makes sense that I had a horrible time with relationships with men because my baseline was what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And when you are a child and you don't know what sex is, and you have a family member who's a grandparent define it for you, and it's a hostile, angry thing, and you're used for that purpose, you think that's your purpose, and you think that's the way it's supposed to be. So without having any prior knowledge, that's kind of the starting point. And it took a long time to undo that. And I think it's life experience, it's age, it's the willingness to want to try, it's the willingness to accept what you need to change. And breaking habits. And, I think, in Laura's podcast, she talked a lot about, that we turn to things that aren't good for us as a coping mechanism, right? So
Yeah.
she turned to drinking, right? Well, I was an addict too. I smoked cigarettes for years, and I did it in secret. I didn't, people didn't know because it was, coming from such a place of shame. Um, and I think that, um, you know, we do find these coping mechanisms, and they can be damaging and they can be destructive. But I think that, life is a process where we just continue to grow and heal. And these hard things, as hard as they are, they do make us more resilient. And so, I look back at the trauma that I've had, and I look at my life right now, and I wish I hadn't had to go through it, but it's made me who I am now, and I have a really happy life.
Yeah. I mean, of course, we don't want to go through the things we go through, but if we can, take something away from it to make ourselves a little better as a result, and I think that's a great thing.
Yes. And so a couple of things. I think that what's been was an incredibly huge turning point in my life was reconnecting with my cousin.
Mm-hmm.
And that has been a life altering effect, because we have both, looked back at our past, and now we've decided that we're putting work boots on our pain. So we're taking our bad experiences, and we've started this nonprofit, Say It Survivor, and we are helping other survivors, and we are trying to encourage and supporting survivors of sexual abuse to stand firmly in their stories, and to realize and recognize that this was not a personal thing that happened to them. I mean, there was nothing personal about it. And that's very similar to bullying. It feels so personal, but we didn't do anything to deserve it. And we shouldn't, um, you know, think that it's, talking about it is sharing personal information, because it's anything but that. So, Say It Survivor has really been life changing, not only for Laura and for me, but for many of the people who participate in our workshops or in our community, who have said that it has changed their lives. And Laura and I constantly say, there's nothing unique about our story, unfortunately. It's just that we're telling it. We're telling it shamelessly. And that's given other people a space where they can do that too. And it's been incredibly liberating and helpful.
Mm-hmm. Have you been able to do healing with Laura as well now that you guys have reconnected?
Oh, yeah. I think she's been a huge part of my healing. And I think it goes both ways. I mean, we talk about it all the time. And the unique thing that we have together is that we had the same abuser, and it was within the family. So there just have been so many questions that have been asked, and so many things that make sense to us. And like we kind of complete the missing puzzle pieces for each other. And just as an example, we were talking one day about running up the basement stairs, and you know how you have some basement stairs just have the footboard; they don't have the riser.
Mm-hmm.
And so we talked one day about how neither of us liked that, and we would run up the stairs. And I said, well, that's because he used to hide underneath the stairs. And our grandfather lived in a deck house, and it had the wooden stairs that just were the flats, and he would hide under, and he would grab our ankles as we were running up. And she didn't remember that. But then it just made sense, because, we're each filling in the blanks where the other person didn't remember. Like, I don't remember warning her. So yeah, it's been a huge
Yeah,
part
interesting.
of Yeah, and I think that that's so why it's so important for anyone who has been, suffered from abuse or trauma, bullying, to be in community. Because when you are in community with others, you do not feel so alone.
Mm-hmm.
You come together and you can heal.
Yeah, it's very difficult to heal on your own.
Yeah, especially if you're not telling your story. And I think that you didn't tell your story for a long time. You didn't talk about being bullied, did you?
Yeah, it took me a while. Um, I didn't first share it until like 5 years after it happened.
Hmm.
And then I only, I shared it with my mother first, and then probably just a couple other people after that, for several more years before I started the website and the blog and started sharing that way.
Hmm. Which is great. It's great that you have that platform. I'm sure that it's so helpful for our community, and I'm happy that you're doing it because it's so necessary.
Oh, thank you.
Of course.
So, were there other things that have helped you in your healing journey that you wanted to mention that we haven't talked about?
Um. Well, I think that the number one is talking about it, and whether that's telling your story or talking to someone privately about it if you need to, and that's been huge for me. And doing the work. I mean, and I think that one of the things that really helped me, even at the beginning, was trying to. It was hard, but trying, convincing myself that it wasn't my fault, and that I was not all those things that they said, and that it was that they were wrong. And it's interesting because um, Facebook has put, Facebook has, obviously connects people from all points of our lives. And one of those girls who was a bully reached out and wanted to friend me on Facebook.
Oh, really?
And it was so interesting because I was just like, hell to the no. I don't want to be friends. But, I have a dog, and one is called Mary Morphosis, and it's about change. And in my blog, I talk a lot about bullying. And it's um, someone read from high school or from middle school, read that blog and um, stopped by my childhood home. My mother happened to be outside one day. This was probably, I don't know, 3 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And stopped, walked by and said, I was so awful to your daughter in the 6th grade, and I'm so sorry. And I thought, in the age of technology, it would have been nice to have heard from her directly.
So you
But
never ended up speaking to her?
no, she just apologized to my mother.
Hmm.
So it's interesting. It's just interesting. Um, and I know I did hear through the grapevine from another one of the, the girls that she felt terrible, that she was so awful to me. And, I think that bullies grow up too. And some bullies are always bullies, but some bullies are just, I don't know if they outgrow it per se, but I think they look back and realize how wrong they were and
Mm-hmm.
how awful they were. And I think that when I was in elementary school, I don't think I was always the nicest person. I think I could be probably a little rough around the edges. I didn't target anybody, but kids can be not kind. But I think there's a difference between an elementary school kid. You know, um, I don't know. I can't even think of an example. I think kids are brutally honest when they're little, but I think that the premeditated, calculated, manipulative bullying that goes on with middle school girls it's got to stop.
Yeah, I think it's much more vicious at that age.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Laura says all the time, um, she says, hurt people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's something that has been helpful to me because when I hear or see someone lashing out and being cruel to someone else, a lot of times it's because they're hurt
Yeah.
themselves and broken. And the way that they feel better about themselves is to try to drag someone else down.
Yeah.
Just wrong, but
It doesn't make it okay, but yeah, most of the time there are going to be someone who's hurting from something too.
right. And you never know. I mean, you never know what someone else is going through, and it's just like the preface for your it's greener. Like you don't know. So all that um, that I've written on my blog, Metamorphosis, is I've had people from grammar school reach out to me and say, I had no idea that you were going through that at the time. You always seemed like a happy girl, but I had no idea you were being abused. I'm so sorry to hear that. So I think that something that people need to be aware of too is that you don't know what everyone else is going through.
Mm-hmm.
And again, what you said, Melissa, it doesn't ever make it right, but it brings some sort of not sense to it, but get your head around it a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
So
I know, you shared about a little bit about your life today and how well you're doing. Are there any things that you still struggle with as a result of everything you went through?
I will always struggle with being a perfectionist. And I don't think I will. Try as I might. I don't think I'll ever be able to shake that.
I've been trying as well.
It's not.
It's a tough one.
It is a tough one. Um, but I think that I'm at a point now in my life where when I'm triggered by something, I know I'm being triggered by it. I don't get upset and then, I'm not trying to figure out why. I know exactly when it happens. And I think that self-awareness at this point is able to ground me. Because, we are all human beings and all have baggage and we all have trigger points and you don't know when they're going to come up. But doing the work and getting to know yourself so that you can see that coming and you can be in charge of how you feel about something has been enormously helpful too. So it doesn't go away, but you just learn how to be in charge.
Yeah, so that it doesn't derail you so much.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us a little more about what it is that you do today, like beyond your work with Say It Survivor.
Oh, we'd be happy to. So I am a writer. I write a couple of different blogs. I write a blog, as I said before, called Metamorphosis, and it's all about change. So that's kind of one of my hobbies. I also am an interior designer, and I own a interior design firm called Living Lovelier, and it's livinglovelier.com, and I have a blog on that, and I enjoy doing staging and interior design and cooking, and I was a personal chef for a short time. And at this point right now, I am enjoying that. And I just bought my first horse. I've ridden horses since I was 8 years old. And a month ago, I had finally purchased my own horse. So I ride my horse every day.
Oh, that's
so,
awesome.
Yeah. So that, along with my 3 boys and my husband and my black lab, I'm a busy woman.
Yeah. Well, sounds like all good things going on, though.
Yeah, it's all great. And Laura and I will continue to forge on with Say It Survivor, and especially in light of everything that's going on with Me Too. And, we'll continue to shine a light on those dark things. And thank you for the opportunity to let us shine a light on the important topic of bullying and the effects that it has. It's great work that you're doing. So thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have one final question that I want to ask you before we wrap up.
Sure.
And that is, given what you know now, if you could go back to when you were going through your tough times and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
That is a really good question. I think that I would give myself the advice to trust myself. just to trust myself and only believe in what I know and not let anyone try to take that away. Because believing in who you are is not always easy to do. And when you have people who are being cruel and trying to define who you are, it gets very scary. And if I just had the voice inside of me saying, you got this, and just trust yourself, I think that would have been really helpful.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things that we lose in all of that, and it's terrible because, it just leads to so many things down the line. If we can't trust ourselves and we're not able to trust others, and we just, it contributes to us not being sure of who we are. It just has such a cascading effect, I think.
Yeah, we just feel lost.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the scary point. That's where it becomes really scary for a young person, particularly, who's just starting out, to feel so lost and such despair. And I think that, just to have some way of knowing to just stay, to be okay and be okay in that moment, and just to trust yourself, not listen. That sounds so trite and easy, but it's not.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that would have helped me a lot.
Yeah.
I think that just being able to say, you know, get away from me and leave me alone, and you're not all that. If I had had that confidence and the trust in myself to deflect it and not take it, maybe things would have been different.
When did you get that trust back?
I would say, probably 20 years ago, 25 years ago. I mean, and that was just the beginning. And it would rear its ugly head and I wouldn't trust myself. But, probably in the last 10 years, I've trusted my gut and myself, and felt really good about who I am and where I am in the world and what I do and how I give back, and the woman that I am,
Mm-hmm.
and the mom and the wife and friend. But, I was shaky. I was shaky there for a while.
Yeah, and it doesn't come back overnight.
It doesn't. It doesn't. But, I think it's just kind of like a lot of it has to do with age and maturity and timing and putting in the work. I mean, I think it's a combo platter.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say, it took me a good 10 years to really, after I graduated from college, to really kind of be better, like okay. I was still making poor decisions in terms of people men I dated and people that I allowed into my life. And, it, as you just said, it doesn't happen overnight. But, here I am at the point where I don't care about any of those people anymore. It doesn't matter to me. They don't matter to me. Their opinion doesn't matter to me. The cruel girls who were so nasty in college, they don't matter to me. They just don't.
Mm-hmm.
I actually feel kind of bad for them, because they must be really not happy people to have to find, entertainment in hurting someone else like
Mm-hmm.
that. Because it really was sport. It really was sport. So shame on them. And the best part about it is that, I have a great, happy life now.
Mm-hmm.
I feel entirely blessed by that. So, yeah, it's been a journey.
But yeah, I mean, it's great that you're doing well today. And, like they say, I mean, what other people think of us is none of our business, right?
Right. And it doesn't matter.
It's about what we think of ourselves.
What we think of ourselves. And, pick good people. I think that, I can't remember who said this. So I hope somebody will chime in after, and it would have been Maya Angelou, but that we teach people how to treat us.
Mm-hmm.
We do. We teach people how to treat us.
Mm-hmm.
So teach them. Teach them it's not okay.
You do, and that's where boundaries come in, and why it's so important to have them.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm glad you brought that up, because defining boundaries was really, really hard for me to do. And I'm good at them now, and I fiercely protect my boundaries. But that was one of the harder things that I had to overcome.
Mm-hmm.
But once you do, boy, it sure does feel good.
Yeah, take your power back.
You take your power back. You're right.
Well, Mary, before I let you go, what is the best way for people to connect with you or find out about everything you have going on today?
So a great way to connect with me is to go through sayitsurvivor.org. You can email me there at mary.sayitsurvivor@gmail.com, or you can reach out to me on my lifestyle blog, livinglovelier@gmail.com.
All right, sounds good. I'll have that linked up on the show notes page. And I just want to thank you again for coming on here today, for sharing your story with us, and for letting us know that, yeah, things can get better. And I know you and I were saying before we started recording that, you know, when you're in the situation, it doesn't feel like it. You know, you can't see anything beyond that. But that, you know, it can definitely get better. And that's why I love to have people like yourself come on here just to share that message and to give others that hope for their own situation. So thank you.
Yes, and you're very welcome. And anyone who wants to talk more about it, I encourage you to reach out to me because I would love to help in any way that I can. So thanks for your great work. And it was really a pleasure to talk to you today.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. You too. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the show today. This has been the Grass Gets Greener podcast, episode 126. Go to thegrassgetsgreener.com/Mary Lovely to find the links mentioned during this episode or to leave a comment. So I hope you enjoyed getting to hear from Mary today and that she has provided you with some hope for your situation. I know Mary is passionate about letting others know that things can get better and that even if it doesn't feel that way now, it doesn't mean that it will always feel that way. I know it's a message we've heard before, and I think it's always worth repeating because everyone deserves to have hope. So if nothing else, please hang on to that. And come back in 2 weeks for the next episode. I'm going to be joined by author and musician Sandra Donald, who's going to talk about her experience with bullying as well, and how music and writing have helped her in her healing. So be sure to come back to check that one out. Also head over to the website to grab your free copy of the Top 10 Strategies Guide for Survivors. In it, you'll find the top 10 most common strategies my podcast guests have used for overcoming the effects of past trauma. It's a great place to get started if you're looking for some strategies that can help you in your healing as they have helped my guests. And you can find that at thegrassgetsgreener.com/guide or also on the show notes page. So be sure to grab that if you haven't yet. And lastly, don't forget to head over to iTunes or Stitcher to leave the show a rating and review so that we can reach as many survivors as possible. And, as always, have hope.